Before we begin, we publish new content every day. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody warns you that sometimes your own blood can freeze your heart solid. I learned this lesson at 56, standing alone in the Alaskan wilderness with a sprained ankle and nothing but a single chocolate bar. Watching my only son walk away after pushing me down that rocky slope. The grizzly bears he mentioned were the least of my worries that day. My name is Michelle, and I built an empire from nothing. After my husband died 12 years ago, I channeled every ounce of grief into creating a logistics company that now employs over 300 people across the Pacific Northwest. Success came at a price, though. While I was conquering boardrooms and closing million-dollar deals, I was losing my son Leo to a world of gambling debts, empty promises, and entitled expectations. The warning signs had been there for years, glaring red flags I chose to ignore because acknowledging them would mean admitting I had failed as a mother. Leo would disappear for weeks, then resurface with elaborate stories about job interviews that never materialized and business opportunities that always required just one more loan from mom. Each time he asked, I told myself this would be the last time, that this money would finally set him straight. The pattern became sickeningly predictable. Leo would charm his way through my defenses, speaking softly about how much he appreciated everything I had done, how he understood my sacrifices, how he was finally ready to turn his life around. Then came the ask, always wrapped in urgency and desperation. The underground poker games had gotten out of hand. The loan sharks were circling. He just needed $50,000 this time, maybe 75, and he would never ask again. I kept detailed records of every loan, every bail payment, every gambling debt I covered. The spreadsheet on my laptop told a story I did not want to face. Over the past 5 years, I had given Leo nearly $400,000. $400,000 that could have funded college scholarships or expanded my business or secured my retirement. Instead, it had vanished into the bottomless pit of his addiction and selfishness. The morning of our final confrontation, Leo burst into my Seattle office, looking like he had not slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his designer clothes wrinkled and stained. The desperation in his eyes was different this time, raw and more dangerous than I had ever seen. He did not bother with pleasantries or his usual charming preamble. The words tumbled out in a panicked rush about owing money to people who would break his legs if he did not pay by the end of the week. He needed $50,000 immediately. No questions asked, no repayment plan discussed. For the first time in years, I said no. The word hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. I watched his face transform from shock to anger to something that looked almost like hatred. The mask of the loving son slipped completely, revealing someone I barely recognized. His voice turned cold and calculating as he accused me of using money to control him, of never truly caring about his happiness or well-being. He claimed I enjoyed keeping him dependent, that my help came with invisible strings designed to make him dance to my tune forever. The accusation stung because buried within his manipulation was a grain of truth I had been avoiding. Had my financial support become a way to keep him close? To maintain some semblance of the mother-son relationship we used to have? The conversation ended with Leo slamming his fist on my mahogany desk, hard enough to rattle the family photos displayed there. One of them, a picture of Leo graduating high school with his father's proud hand on his shoulder, fell face down. The symbolism was not lost on me as Leo stormed out, shouting that if anything happened to him, it would be my fault entirely. 3 days passed in tense silence. I threw myself into work, reviewing quarterly reports and planning the expansion into the Portland market. But concentration proved impossible when every phone ring made my heart race. Wondering if this would be the call, telling me they had found Leo's body in some alley. Then he returned, transformed once again into the apologetic, sweet-talking son I remembered from his childhood. The anger was gone, replaced by what seemed like genuine remorse and vulnerability. He spoke about the stress he had been under, how sorry he was for his harsh words, how much he valued our relationship despite everything that had happened. His proposal caught me completely off guard. A camping trip to Denali National Park in Alaska. Just the two of us, to reconnect and heal the wounds that had been festering between us. He claimed to have won the trip in some charity auction, complete with guided tours and wilderness permits. The timing felt suspicious, but the idea of escaping Seattle's gray skies and spending quality time with Leo, away from his usual temptations, was undeniably appealing. More than that, the destination held deep emotional significance for both of us. My late husband had been an avid outdoorsman who taught me basic survival skills during our weekend camping trips to the Cascades. Denali was where we had planned to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary before cancer took him away. Leo knew this, knew how much those memories meant to me. Despite my lingering suspicions, I found myself agreeing to the trip. Hope is a dangerous thing when you are desperate to believe your child can change. I convinced myself this could be our chance to rebuild the relationship that had been corroded by years of disappointment and financial strain. The flight to Anchorage gave us 3 hours of forced proximity that felt almost normal. Leo was attentive and engaging, asking about my business and sharing what seemed like genuine enthusiasm for our upcoming adventure. He had done his research, talking knowledgeably about the park's wildlife and hiking trails. For brief moments, I caught glimpses of the intelligent, curious boy he used to be before gambling consumed his life. We rented camping equipment in Anchorage and drove the winding road toward Denali. The Alaska wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction, a reminder of how small and vulnerable humans really are when stripped of their urban comforts and conveniences. Leo kept up a steady stream of conversation during the drive, pointing out wildlife and sharing interesting facts he had apparently memorized from guidebooks. Our first night camping went smoothly enough. We set up the tent together, cooked a simple dinner over the camp stove, and sat around the fire, talking about Dad's old camping stories. Leo even apologized again for his behavior in my office, admitting he had been under tremendous stress and had taken his frustrations out on the one person who had always stood by him. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of pristine mountain air that makes you feel truly alive. We packed light day bags and set out on what Leo described as an easy 3-mile hike to a scenic overlook he had read about online. The trail was well marked initially, but after about an hour of walking, Leo suggested we take what he called a shortcut to avoid the crowds of other hikers. I should have trusted my instincts when the path became increasingly difficult to follow. My husband had always emphasized the importance of staying on marked trails, especially in unfamiliar wilderness areas. But Leo seemed confident about the route, and I did not want to dampen his enthusiasm by questioning his judgment. We eventually stopped for a break in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. I was tired and my ankle was beginning to ache from the uneven terrain, but the scenery was breathtaking enough to make the discomfort worthwhile. Leo helped me sit down on a fallen log and handed me a water bottle with unusual attentiveness. That was when everything changed in the space of a few terrible seconds. I was looking out at the vista, thinking about how my husband would have loved this view when Leo moved behind me. I assumed he was adjusting his backpack or taking photos. The shove came without warning. A hard, deliberate push that sent me tumbling down a rocky slope I had not even noticed was there. The pain in my ankle was immediate and excruciating as it twisted beneath me during the fall. I rolled several feet before coming to rest against a boulder, stunned and struggling to understand what had just happened. When I looked up, Leo was standing at the edge of the slope, his expression completely transformed. Gone was any pretense of the loving son. In its place was something cold and calculating that made my blood freeze. He was holding both our backpacks, including my purse with the satellite communicator I had insisted we bring for emergencies. The methodical way he checked through the equipment told me this was not a moment of rage or temporary insanity. This was planned. His voice was eerily calm as he explained that my will was already up to date, that people would understand how tragic accidents could happen to inexperienced hikers in dangerous wilderness areas. He thanked me for being such a dedicated mother, for teaching him that money was the most important thing in any relationship. The single chocolate bar he tossed down to me landed just out of reach, a final, cruel gesture that seemed designed to emphasize my complete helplessness. He suggested I enjoy my last meal while the grizzly bears were still sleeping, then turned and walked away without looking back. The silence that followed his departure was more terrifying than anything he had said. I was alone in the Alaskan wilderness with a badly sprained ankle. No supplies, no communication device, and no clear idea of how to get back to civilization. The temperature was already dropping as afternoon shadows grew longer, and I knew hypothermia would likely kill me before hunger or wild animals had the chance. But something remarkable happened as I sat there confronting the reality of my situation. Instead of panic or despair, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me like a protective blanket. The shock of Leo's betrayal was giving way to something much more powerful. The survival instincts that had built my company from nothing and carried me through the darkest days after my husband's death. I had spent years making excuses for Leo's behavior, convincing myself that underneath his selfishness and manipulation was the loving son I remembered from his childhood. But children grow up, and sometimes they grow into people you would never choose to have in your life if they were not related to you by blood. The physical pain in my ankle forced me to focus on immediate practical concerns rather than dwelling on emotional wounds that could be processed later. Using techniques my husband had taught me years ago, I found 2 straight branches and used strips torn from my shirt to create a makeshift splint. The process was agonizing, but it gave me enough stability to hobble short distances. My husband's voice seemed to echo in my memory as I assessed my resources and options. Stay calm. Use your brain. Look for water sources and high ground. The sun was my compass, and years of weekend camping trips had taught me basic wilderness navigation principles. Finding the stream took most of the remaining daylight, but water was essential for survival. I spent that first night huddled against a large boulder, using my jacket as inadequate protection against the bitter cold. Sleep came in fitful fragments interrupted by pain and the constant awareness that every sound in the darkness could signal approaching danger. The second day brought new challenges, as hunger began to join thirst and pain in my symphony of misery. My husband had taught me to identify a few edible plants common to northern forests, and knowledge I had never expected to need for actual survival. The bitter taste of what I hoped were safe berries was a feast compared to the emptiness gnawing at my stomach. Walking was torturous with my injured ankle, but staying in one place meant certain death. I forced myself to keep moving, following the stream downstream in the hope that it would eventually lead to more traveled areas of the park. Every step was a small victory against the voice in my head that whispered about giving up. Late on the second afternoon, as exhaustion was making it difficult to think clearly, I heard the distant rumble of engines. The sound grew steadily louder until 3 ATV riders emerged from the forest like characters from a rescue fantasy I had been afraid to let myself imagine. The man in the lead was weathered and competent looking, probably in his early 60s, with the kind of deep tan that comes from spending entire lifetimes outdoors. He took one look at my condition and immediately radioed for additional help while his companions provided first aid and emergency supplies. His name was Arthur, and he turned out to be a retired park ranger who now ran wilderness tours for adventure-seeking tourists. More importantly, He had been one of my husband's closest friends during their younger years when they had spent summers working together in various national parks across the country. Arthur recognized me from an old photograph my husband had shown him decades ago, back when we were all young and naive enough to believe that love and good intentions were enough to protect us from life's cruelest surprises. The recognition in his eyes, when he heard my story, was immediately followed by an anger that seemed to burn just beneath his careful professional composure. In Alaska, Arthur explained as his team helped me back to their base camp, abandoning someone in the wilderness was legally equivalent to attempted murder. The state took such crimes very seriously, especially when they occurred in areas where survival without proper equipment was virtually impossible. But before we involved law enforcement, Arthur had a suggestion that appealed to both my desire for justice and my instinct for strategic thinking. His years of experience in these mountains had taught him shortcuts and back routes that could get us to the ranger station hours before Leo could possibly arrive there on foot. The ride back to civilization gave me time to process what had happened and what I wanted to do about it. The betrayal hurt worse than the physical injuries, but underneath the pain was something that felt almost like relief. The pretense was finally over. I no longer had to wonder whether Leo's affection was genuine or question my own judgment about his character and intentions. My first call from Arthur's office was to my attorney in Seattle, a sharp woman who had helped me structure my business to weather every kind of legal and financial storm. The will I had updated after our confrontation in my office was already legally binding. Leo would inherit nothing from me, and my entire estate would fund a conservation foundation dedicated to protecting the very wilderness he had tried to use as my grave. Arthur helped me set up recording equipment in the ranger station's guest quarters, where Leo would expect to find refuge after his long hike back to safety. Hidden cameras would capture whatever story he planned to tell about my tragic disappearance and unfortunate demise in the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. I did not have to wait long. Leo and his girlfriend Chloe arrived at the station just after sunset, both looking appropriately distressed and concerned about my welfare. Their performance was almost impressive in its calculated sincerity as they explained to Arthur how I had wandered off during the night and failed to return to our campsite. The cameras captured their relief when Arthur told them I was still missing and that search teams would resume looking for me at first light. They accepted his offer of food and shelter for the night with gratitude that seemed genuine until they thought they were alone. What followed was one of the most disturbing conversations I had ever witnessed. Leo and Chloe discussed my probable death with casual indifference, speculating about how long it would take for my body to be discovered and whether wild animals would destroy enough evidence to prevent uncomfortable questions from investigators. Chloe worried about whether Leo's story would hold up under scrutiny, but he assured her that grieving sons were rarely suspected of murdering their mothers for inheritance money. He had done his research, he claimed, and knew exactly how to play the role of the devastated survivor seeking answers about his beloved mother's disappearance. They celebrated their success with a bottle of wine from Arthur's emergency supplies, toasting their future plans for my money with a callousness that made me question whether Leo had ever possessed the capacity for genuine human emotion. Their laughter, as they speculated about my final moments, was the sound of something irrevocably breaking inside my chest. The next morning brought law enforcement officers who had been briefed on the situation and shown the recorded evidence of Leo's confession to attempted murder. I remained hidden while they questioned him about my disappearance, listening as he repeated the story he had rehearsed about my tragic decision to explore unfamiliar wilderness areas alone. His performance was flawless, right up until the moment I walked into the room, accompanied by Arthur and a sheriff's deputy. The look on Leo's face shifted through confusion, shock, and terror before settling into something that looked almost like hatred. Even caught red-handed, he could not resist one final attempt at manipulation. He tried to claim that pushing me had been an accident, that his words on the recording had been taken out of context, that anyone would understand how grief and stress could make a person say things they did not really mean. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his excuses only made his situation worse. The legal proceedings that followed were surprisingly swift. Leo's recorded confession, combined with the physical evidence of my injuries, made conviction almost inevitable. His public defender advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a trial that would likely result in a much harsher sentence. Watching my son led away in handcuffs should have been more devastating than it was. Instead, I felt something that could only be described as peace. The relationship I had been struggling to preserve for years was finally revealed as the illusion it had always been. Leo had never seen me as his mother, only as a resource to be exploited and eventually discarded. The months following Leo's sentencing were the most transformative period of my adult life. Without the constant drain of his financial demands and emotional manipulation, I had energy to focus on things that actually mattered. My business continued to thrive, but I began delegating more responsibilities to trusted employees so I could pursue interests that had been neglected during my years of single motherhood. The conservation foundation I established in my husband's memory became my primary focus outside of work. We funded research projects studying grizzly bear populations, supported park ranger training programs, and provided wilderness safety education to prevent the kind of tragedies that could have easily claimed my life. Arthur became an unexpected friend, and eventually, something more. His knowledge of my husband's character provided a bridge between my past and present that felt both comfortable and healing. We shared an understanding of loss and renewal that did not require extensive explanation or justification. 6 months after Leo's conviction, Arthur and I returned to Denali together, this time properly equipped and guided by his expert knowledge of the terrain. Standing at the overlook where my son had tried to murder me, I felt no anger or desire for revenge. Instead, I experienced something that could only be called gratitude. The wilderness that was supposed to be my graveyard had become the birthplace of my authentic self. Stripped of illusions about family loyalty and unconditional love, I had discovered reserves of strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. The woman who had built a successful business was also capable of surviving betrayal by the person she loved most in the world. My relationship with Leo was permanently severed, but I no longer mourned its loss. Some relationships are too toxic to preserve, regardless of blood ties or shared history. Recognizing this truth had set me free to build connections based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and manipulation. The foundation's work gave me purpose that felt more meaningful than any business success I had achieved. Every acre of wilderness we helped protect was a victory against the kind of selfishness and short-sightedness that Leo represented. The park rangers we trained might save other families from experiencing the kind of betrayal that had shattered mine. Today, I understand that being a mother does not require accepting abuse or enabling destructive behavior. Love without boundaries is not love at all, but a form of emotional slavery that benefits no one. My son made his choices, and I made mine. The difference is that my choices led to growth and healing, while his led to a prison cell and a future defined by the consequences of his actions. The grizzly bears Leo mentioned that day in the wilderness were indeed dangerous, but they turned out to be far more honest than he was. Wild animals kill for food or protection, not for money or inheritance. There is something pure about that kind of survival instinct compared to the calculated cruelty humans are capable of inflicting on those who trust them most. I sleep peacefully now, knowing that my resources are protected and will be used for purposes my husband would have supported wholeheartedly. The foundation bears his name and continues his legacy of environmental stewardship, something that feels far more important than providing endless financial support for a son who saw me only as a means to an end. The Alaska wilderness taught me that survival is not about avoiding danger, but about facing it with clear eyes and determined action. Some threats come from outside, but the most devastating ones often come from within our own families, hidden behind familiar faces and declarations of love that mask purely selfish motivations. My story is not about revenge or punishment, though justice was certainly served. It is about the possibility of redemption and renewal, even after the most profound betrayals. It is about learning to distinguish between genuine love and skillful manipulation, and having the courage to walk away from relationships that drain your soul regardless of what society expects from mothers and children. I am 56 years old, financially secure, emotionally healthy, and surrounded by people who value me for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can provide for them. The son who tried to murder me in the wilderness gave me an unexpected gift by showing me exactly who he really was. That knowledge set me free to become who I was always meant to be.